Week 4. Let's go ahead and get started. Just to recap last week, try this again, what we did last week. Would anyone in like 60 seconds want to recap just the story where we've been so far in Exodus?
Babysit a 2-year-old.
You what?
I babysit a 2-year-old all day.
Oh, so you're off the hook. You're off the hook.
Can I drop mine off?
Yeah.
No, it's not one of those kind of situations. No pay.
Yeah.
Was at a wedding with all your grandkids.
What has the story been so far? What would you describe the story as about?
A roller coaster.
A roller coaster. In what way?
Well, I would say like there's great downs and really high highs, and
Yep.
then now we're getting down to another down.
Yeah.
Where they're
Yeah.
just like it just feels like life. It feels like what I experience sometimes. Maybe not quite those highs. I've never had the sea parted, but but it just feels like normal humanity. You know.
Yeah. That's good. That's great. Last week we went over starting off with the first Passover feast, the first Passover meal during the final plague. And does anyone remember just what were the things that would stand out that an early Israelite reading it, what the things that would stood out to them that we discussed last week?
That it was a feast, not a horse sacrifice. Yeah.
Exactly. Great. What else with the feast?
Well, the picture, obviously, of Jesus.
Yeah. So there's also
But they didn't know that. So
right. Yeah. There's also the concept of rest. What does he invite them into?
Yeah.
He invites them into a feast to remember their salvation, and he invites them to take quite literally these days to rest that they've never had before.
Yeah.
And are we in line with that? If we're in Christ and we've been brought into the story, are we going to see that later on, where there's a feast we're supposed to regularly keep, where we're invited to remember the story, remember the salvation, and are invited to rest and just feast with the Lord. So that we started with that, and then I just kind of want to double down, and I feel like I've already doubled down enough on this, but just want to do it again. Who did the gods of Egypt choose? We've been talking about it for like the last 3 weeks. Who do the gods of Egypt choose?
The power.
They choose the powerful. They choose empire. They choose those who can help themselves. It's just everyone in that culture was always afraid of the gods. But if your empire was doing really well, it was obvious the gods are pleased with you. It's obviously you're doing everything right because you got the mightiest military on the face of this earth. You got the most biggest buildings. You got all the power. So the gods have chosen you. You're pleasing to the gods. But who does the God of Exodus choose? The God who is the most powerful God, who has already demonstrated his power over any other god of Egypt, over any other power. And what does he choose? He chooses slaves. He chooses the lowly. Cannot stress that enough because, what was that?
Shepherds.
Yeah, exactly. Cannot stress that enough because I think I may have shared this already, how, there's a debate going on today about, what parts of Exodus are literal, what parts are metaphorical or whatnot. But the thing that you cannot stress enough is that no ancient nation back then would ever choose to be associated as your national identity as ex-slaves. Nothing was lower than slaves. And so to say, what makes us a nation, what makes us who we are, is that we were slaves, but we were redeemed. We were saved from that. Nobody would do that back then. And so it's just in keeping with the story about a God who does not choose power, he chooses humility. He chooses the lowly and the weak and the oppressed. And we see that he makes this distinction between this kind of glory and then this humility, this suffering of what he chooses and what he decides to enter into. So we then see where Exodus gets its title. We see the mass exodus. Can everybody see this? Everybody good? Cool. We see the mass exodus, and we see this God quite literally walking with his people in a cloud by day and fire by night. And again, just that the language used there throughout Exodus and describing when God is like, I am taking you to this place. That's always used in marriage and adoption language. That God is quite literally walking his people out across the threshold to their new home together.
I thought that was just the early voting lines.
No. It's a long line.
It was a long line. 2.5 hours long.
Yeah, wow. So we went over this too, that nobody knows where the Reed Sea was, commonly mistranslated as the Red Sea. No one knows where it was, but we know that Egypt went as far as this stream here, or the sea here. And so we discussed what would it mean for an Egyptian for the Israelites to go into the Reed Sea and come out, where we even see in their mythology here, they believe that was the Sea of Reeds, was quite literally where every soul went. It was the equivalent of purgatory, where everybody just went there and waited until the God of the underworld let you in to paradise. So for them to see a foreign nation of slaves go into that sea that their God split right in half in front of them and pull them out of the dead, are we going to see any of that connection later on where the chosen people... Oh, wow. That was like a whole mob.
That was pre-Halloween.
Right. You see the chosen people going into the waters of destruction and judgment and coming out the other side, and then the waters enclosing on the Egyptian army. What would that say to an Egyptian? Quite literally say that our God didn't choose who got in and out of there. Their God has the power over the underworld, who decides who goes in and who goes out. And he actually took these slaves, brought them in and out, and then threw our proudest military into the middle of that. It would have just been this huge, complete dichotomy shift for them. But we see for an Israelite what it would mean for them as the oppressed people, as the people looked down upon in society. And this God chooses them above any other nation in the world. Before any other nation that could be of benefit to him, he chooses them. And he walks them through the bloody door. And how we talk, how rabbis for centuries have always interpreted that as a child coming out. That they go through blood and they go through water quite literally. And how that would mean Yahweh bringing forth basically his child. And he says, Israel is my son, again and again and again throughout Exodus. What else would that mean about the Ruach, the Spirit, the breath of God going over the waters? What would that signal to someone? What's going to happen? If the Spirit is coming across the waters of chaos, what's about to happen? Order. Creation. Or new creation in this. So every Israelite at this period is always looking back to this moment as the moment where God took them and ransomed them and made them his own people. They are a new creation. They have gone past the farthest boundary of the Egyptian empire. They're no longer in Egypt's jurisdiction. They're a new creation, a new people. And that's a story that Christ, it's a story that Paul looks back upon and says he keeps just using Exodus language again and again and again and being like, that story, if you're in Christ, you have been brought into that story. So that story is now your story because of what Christ has done and how he's lived that Exodus out. In fact, if you look at Luke's gospel, he even mentions at one point when Jesus is going to Jerusalem for that final Passover, and he says it's the Mount of Transfiguration when Jesus and Moses and Elijah appeared to him on the Mount. And says, and they were talking to him about the Exodus he was to accomplish. So there was this constant understanding about what Jesus has done mirrors that and brings it into its fullest reality. And we even see this. I mean, don't even mention Jesus in describing the story. It's a story about people who are leaving the land of Egypt, who are saved by the shedding of blood of an innocent lamb for each of their doorposts. They're brought out of slavery. They go into the waters that always represent judgment and death. They come out of it a new people. There's a spirit moment because the Ruach, the breath of God, is moving on the water. So there's a new identity. There's a new birth. There are new people who are then committed to obedience to Yahweh, to a new way of life. And Paul will draw upon this again and again in his letters in describing the waters of baptism, saying this is that story just reenacted. Yeah?
Is there, I may be totally off on this, but
Yeah.
is there a parallel between when Jesus died, went to hell and led the captives?
See, I didn't mention that. Yeah, that is one of those things where, again, it's a story of the true Israelite going into the belly of the beast in some ways, and he gets to choose whether he comes in or out, kind of a deal. So that's, yeah, I think there's a parallel there as well. Yeah, and I was going to explain this later, but I can just explain it now. When we talk about Christ fulfilling the law, our modern conception of that is usually like there was a test, there was a bunch of questions, and Jesus got all the answers and answered it for us so that we don't have to do that kind of deal. There's all these levels that Jesus beat, and so that we didn't have to. And that is definitely part of it, for sure. The more Eastern Jewish understanding of that is that Christ basically lived the story. He fulfilled what the story was always intended to be and lived it out to its fullest and deepest dimension. He brought it to its clearest reality and did it better than all the characters within the story, is more of a way of, probably a better way of looking at it. So just, yeah, any thoughts or questions or comments or concerns even about just what discussion from last week? Yeah.
When you had that map up that showed the Red Sea.
Oh, yeah.
And those parts.
Yeah.
It's like, did the Pharaoh not think, well, I'm just going to go around and meet them?
Well, it sounds like that he saw where they were at, and that's so they were located in front of it. Because remember, God tells Moses, station them here, because he's luring Pharaoh. So he comes up and it says he saw them, that their back was against the sea, and his intent is to wipe them out. Right, yeah.
I don't think he intended they were going to go through.
Right, yeah. He didn't think there was any possible way they could get away.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wonder how many miles around it is.
Right, yeah.
That's a good
big
question.
amount,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's literally 8 spots. There's literally 8 different places people have cited as maybe this is where they cross, so it's
So it might
hard to
not
tell.
really have looked like that.
Are you saying after they went through the Red Sea, why didn't he go around? Or before?
No, before. I mean, he could see they were going to cross. Well, one, he wouldn't have known how they were doing that.
right.
So I guess it wouldn't make sense for them to go around and then them not.
I
Sorry,
think he
forget
thought
the
they were
question.
cornered if he had.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, remember the concept of Ma'at, that Pharaoh quite literally believed it was his job to keep the waters of chaos at bay. So you have the waters of chaos split in half. So for him to go in after him, he's fully still convinced that I can do this. That's my jurisdiction, my power. I think somebody was saying, yeah.
Yeah, so kind of what I took away from last week was you said he is the God of enough. Like
Yeah.
that he doesn't let things go unchecked,
Yeah.
unheard or unseen.
Yeah.
And that just really spoke to me because like, I mean, when you're in it,
Yeah.
you're in it. And
Yeah.
it feels impossible, but like when he brings you out, then you're called to remember. So
Yep.
it's like this
Yeah,
give and take.
exactly. Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Something that's blowing my mind is how the people of Israel saw the dust cloud of God. Like everybody could
Yeah.
see they're following this dust cloud. That's God, he's leading us.
Yeah.
He parted the sea. They see this, they walk through it, they see it.
Right.
And they still have doubts on
Yeah.
where's the food, where's the water, why are you bringing us to the desert?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And that's kind of, I take that as comforting in a way where I'm like, whew, okay, I've never had that happen, yet I still struggle with it.
they still question it though.
Yeah, yeah.
After
No, it's
seeing all
impressive.
that, they
Yeah.
still question it.
Yeah. No, it is impressive. And that's, we'll talk about that tonight, but yeah, just God's response and all that is fascinating. Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
I just keep thinking about all the empty homes in Egypt covered in blood,
Yeah.
and how that is just like a testament.
Yeah.
Like I bet people would like wander over there and be like,
Yeah.
like,
A bunch of empty homes.
can't like deny that it happened.
Right. Right. Exactly. No, that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if you lose all your slaves, who's going to do all the work?
empire.
The regular civilians.
Right, yep.
Would be assigned to make bricks.
Exactly.
You know.
Well, let's face it, the 10 plagues practically wiped Egypt off the map.
Well, that's true.
You know,
Definitely brought
no
it low.
water, no agriculture, no,
Right.
you know, and that would have lasted for years.
Yeah, and we don't have any historical record that specifically states, there's these people, the Israelites, and these 10 plagues happen. What we do have is several periods in their history where Egypt goes through the ringer, and they talk about even one account saying something along the lines of it was like the sun vanished, everything got so dark. So we have multiple times where plagues are recorded. So yeah, it's definitely fascinating how that all.
Did they ever find anything under the Red Sea?
Yeah.
It depends. So that's a very risky academic question to answer. Depends your opinion. So they found. So this is what an academic would say. Academic would say yes, there is, because again, we're still debating where the Sea of Reeds even is.
Right.
There's still a
But
debate
they found a
amongst
bunch
that.
of chariots somewhere under the
They found occasional pieces of armor and wheels and stuff like that. A strict academic would be like, all you know is that an Egyptian wheel fell into the water.
From where?
We don't.
Point. Right. But that's as far as an academic can go, basically, yeah. So yeah, I leave that up to everybody's discernment on what you
You
do
can
with that.
Google it and see what comes up.
Right, yeah. And it's a lot of discussion.
yeah.
A lot of discussion.
But some things have been found.
Some things, yeah. So, yeah. Did you have a question? I thought you said.
Well, no, I was just gonna say I was kind of impressed as I was listening to these chapters about what a great father-in-law Moses had. He just seemed like a really great guy.
Yeah.
From the point of when Moses left Egypt.
Yeah.
And he gave him a job and a family and.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then later, as we're going to learn today, just did some really. But my question too was, I wondered if, as Jethro comes to meet them, is that like a salvation experience for him?
That's
like,
what
where he sees what God has done, and because they say he was a priest of Midian, but what does that even mean, right? So that'll be interesting to see what you're
there's.
about that.
I think you're right on. I think it is a conversion experience, because he even says there is no God like Yahweh, and he makes the first sacrifice to him for the first time. So it definitely seems like Jethro has come into contact with this is who God is. You'll go ahead.
He seems like a really kind and a very wise man.
Oh yeah.
Based on some of the advice he gives Moses.
Very practical advice. I mean, it looks like you're draining yourself.
I just thought, wow, that's what a great thing for God to give him such a good father-in-law.
Yeah, there's in one of the podcasts I sent, which was I think Dr. Heiser's, which is the dry podcast. It's a bit tough. He talks about Jethro's priesthood, because there's one of the two options of one being again, paganism is rampant everywhere at that point, so he could be a priest of any god at that point. Also, when you look at it, Jethro's ancestors actually come from one of Abraham's sons that he had with a concubine. So it's possible that faith of Abraham had passed on through that line, potentially. No way to know that for sure, but that's a possibility there as well. But yeah, any other comments questions before we dive in?
It's still obvious that Jethro had a very strong character.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
He knew exactly what to tell Moses right in that moment. Being like, this is unhealthy and this is a healthier way to do it. All good. Well, it's fun to see everybody picking up on stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. It's almost like we're all hearing from the same person, the same spirit, talking amongst us on this. So it's cool. So where we left off last week was we've crossed the Red Sea. Israel has crossed the Red Sea. Egyptians on the other side. They are outside of Egypt's border. They are a new people in a new world. And as I mentioned last week, this is the moment in most Exodus movies, the story ends. This is where the Red Sea, we got our high moment, and then if you're lucky, maybe get a little moment of the Ten Commandments at the end. Let's just tack that on in there. Yeah.
I'm often be curious. All in this biblical way. Was the Pharaoh, was he at his capital, or was he among the army when they were chasing the Israelites across the Red Sea?
That's another good question. We don't quite know. Yeah. From my reading of it, reads that he didn't go in with them because God says that this will be a testament to Pharaoh later on for Pharaoh to remember. So I take it that Pharaoh survived the incident. But yeah.
I'm sorry, either way, him getting that news.
Yeah.
Shaken does not even begin to say.
Right.
what
Yeah.
he was thinking on that.
Yeah. It's a totally different worldview being overhauled in the course of a couple of months here that God is working. And so this is the moment where our stories usually like to end off, and when we retell the story. I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. I'm apologizing that I'm not going to apologize. I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, and Usman has actually seen the Lord of the Rings for the first time in the last couple of weeks. So welcome to Middle Earth. But I like this example of just where in all our film depictions or novels and stuff like that, we always end, at chapter 15, and there's 25 more chapters to go. It would be like making a movie like Lord of the Rings on the first half of the first book and ending it right there. I pulled this in just because the irony is just too good not to resist. But if Frodo crosses the river, Anna knows. Do you not like the Lord of the Rings or this film?
Oh, I love it.
Okay, cool. I could tell. So it'd be like as if Frodo crossing the river, the water wipes out the ring wraiths, and ending the movie there. He got the ring to Rivendell and ending the movie there. But you're like, there's still 2.5 books left to go to explore all this. We still have, the Fellowship to take them there, and there's a whole journey that's ahead. That's what we're doing in Exodus when we stop right there and saying that's where it ends. There's a whole journey that's ahead of these characters, and what is God saying through that? And again, one of the things we're going to come back to on the very last week at the end of classes, we're trying to see what is the main message, what's the main theme that the Spirit may be trying to communicate through the book of Exodus. At this point, 15 chapters in, what would your guys' guess be what the main theme or message of Exodus is?
Some hard questions.
The adoption.
There's adoption. So the theme of adoption.
God thought it was pretty important to let the Israelites know who he is.
Yeah.
And who they are.
The identity of Yahweh. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always going to be challenges that we face. We're always going to be tested, trial.
Yeah.
And we need to just trust and believe that he's able to do those things he promised us.
Yeah. That's the fulfillment of the promise and holding to that faith. Most, if you watch any depiction in Prince of Egypt, Ten Commandments, all the movies, it seems to be what people pick up on is there's this theme of freedom. That the story of the Exodus is all about freedom and God setting his people free, which is definitely part of it. I mean, can we all agree that's definitely part of the story? Yeah. But that's the first 15 chapters, and we still have 25 more chapters to go. So this is where we looked at last week. We ended with, okay, Moses is rejoicing and praise and worship at what just has happened. And he says, you have led in your steadfast love the people whom you have redeemed. So past tense, he's saying they're redeemed as of now. They're out of Egypt. You have redeemed them. And he says, you have guided them by your strength to your holy abode. You will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain, the place, O Lord, which you have made for your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. So Moses almost right here, this is kind of the turning point where Moses already kind of laid out where the rest of the story is going to go. Before we get to that, where else have we seen the Lord's abode in Scripture before now? Eden, the Garden of Eden. So you have this beautiful garden where the story began. That was a victory over chaos, the waters of chaos to begin with. And God sets his pride and joy, his creation, humanity within that garden to be with him, to take up time and space, eternity with him. And we see that God is taking Israel to their own promised land. That always is, when it's described, is always given kind of garden descriptions throughout. So you see that God is trying to bring them to his own abode, that they would take as, his abode was Eden. So God is wanting to bring us into Eden. So they're headed to the promised land, but there's a desert in between. So from between the moment of salvation and the promised land, there's a wilderness in between that have to get across and make it through. What was that?
I said the election line looked about like that, just not quite as wide.
Oh.
More like 3 people wide, but
oh, sure, yeah.
Past that hill.
Yeah.
And around the
right. So we're seeing the story is now it's moving from the moment of salvation, and we have the goal, which is the promised land, Yahweh's abode, Yahweh's home that he's bringing them into. But there's this wilderness in between, this journey that has to be taken and had in between. So that's what the next couple of chapters, as you guys are already on to, is what we're going to be going over.
So are we in the wilderness right now?
I think so. If we're entering into the story, as we've been invited to by Christ, there's a lot of parallels with that. There's the moment of salvation. There's a promised land. There's a promised home, Yahweh's abode in the distance. But we have a journey to make in between that have tests and trials along the way. So yeah. A couple of resources. I'll admit that these chapters 15 through 18, I definitely have some material on, but I am taking quite a bit from Marty Solomon. So I just want to make that disclaimer on the front end that a lot of this is from him. And some of it from Tim Mackey of the Bible Project, which I'll send the links out to tomorrow, which will go even further in depth with what we're going into tonight, but wanted to add that. So jumping right in after the Red Sea, it says, Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? So as you pointed out at the beginning of the class, it was like, how long has it been since the moment of salvation when you saw Yahweh open the water, open the sea in front of you? It's been 3 days since that's happened. And you're already grumbling and you're already complaining. Yeah.
But you have to understand the mindset of 400 years of oppression.
Yes.
They don't know anything different.
Exactly.
And so they've struggled with, this is their mindset, it's ingrained within them. So even by starting into the desert, they're still... They're like, why did you drag us out here?
Right, exactly.
Tell me.
You're already ahead of where we're going. So that's excellent. That's right on.
Isn't that called buyer's remorse?
Buyer's remorse, yeah. It might be a little bit. My point in bringing that up is like, even in how I'm saying that and expressing that, you caught on right away of like, it's very easy for us. It's very easy for us to be like those dumb Israelites, just kind of anti-Semitic to say to begin with, but being like, we would never do that. We would never complain if that happened, kind of a deal. Where are they 3 days after this event? Where are they?
The desert.
It's in the text.
The wilderness.
In the wilderness. They're in the wilderness.
The 3-day journey.
The 3 days into the wilderness, as far as you can go into that. And what is the situation here? What is the problem?
Thirsty.
There's no water. Or food. There's no water. I haven't had the opportunity to go to the Middle East yet. That's kind of a dream to go to the Holy Land. But judging from pictures, has anyone been in the desert before?
Yeah, we went to where
You went,
where David slowed Goliath.
Yeah.
Just a big flat desert looking
area. What's the average temp over there? Does anyone remember? 'Cause I've heard.
I don't remember.
120.
Exactly. It's like that's the average, like in the summertime. That is 120 degrees out here with no water. You know, that's pretty rough. You know, and exactly what you're saying. They don't know anything different than what they've experienced up to this point. And how many of us in this situation? You're thinking cattle, you're thinking livestock, you're thinking children.
Yes.
Your children. You're out in the middle of nowhere. Yep. There's nothing. And this is what you're in the middle of. And there's a lot of you. Yeah, we don't know what the numbers specifically, but we're like, it's a lot.
They need a lot of water.
It's a lot. They need a lot of water. So I say that all to again, for us to enter into the story about how does this really feel? Like even right now in hearing that, what's you're imagining yourself in here. This is your outlook for the day. And I mean, what's going through your mind? You're 3 days in and Yahweh has parted the sea, but there hasn't been water in these last 3 days. I mean, just what are the things that are going through your mind?
Who's in charge?
Who's in charge here?
I thought you were going to take care of us.
Yeah.
I'm going to die in this desert.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
We're better off.
And it's all Moses' fault.
Yeah. Poor Moses. He's a fall guy.
They're thinking of the moment.
Yeah, they're thinking about the moment, which, I mean, is a pretty significant moment. Like, it's a pretty hard,
I mean, they're not remembering about the past so far.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So they are forgetting what God has done. Exactly. But notice again, this is, we often read past this and we read it as, those foolish Israelites, those people who couldn't hold to their faith, if I was there, I would have done better kind of deal. Notice Yahweh's response to them in this. It says, Moses cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and rule, and there he tested them. This is one of those moments to underline and start counting from here, where it says God tested them. So I'll send the link out tomorrow. Bible Project does this a great 5-minute short video about the test that keeps happening throughout Scripture again and again and again. Now, just on the front end, like when you hear that word test, what's the expectation of a test for you? Hard. Okay, so hard. That's a great example. What else?
I could get it wrong.
That I'm going to be graded.
That I'm going to be graded. Yeah.
You could fail.
You could fail. Yeah.
It won't last long, maybe?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
They'll be good or bad depending on the situation. Yeah, exactly. So in our modern context, the test is pretty negative. I mean, nobody really wants to take a test, do we? Like nobody's volunteering for this. The difference from an Eastern and Jewish perspective, when Yahweh offers a test, it's not about Yahweh saying, this is how much you suck. Like, this isn't Yahweh's opportunity to be like, I want to show you how stupid you are. Like, and we'll challenge that as we move forward through the passage. Is that what we see Yahweh's like? Often, the test is given. Let me ask this question first. Does Yahweh not really know the answer?
Of course not.
But he's giving them a test anyway. He already knows the answer. Why is he giving them a test?
It's not for his benefit, it's for our benefit.
Exactly. That the Jewish concept of that being like Yahweh doesn't test people just to show them they suck or whatnot, or to even get an answer for himself, but for the benefit of the person going through the test to see where they're at so that they can pass the test, so they can grow in intimacy and closeness with him and actually overcome that. So it's not Yahweh's intent to be like, I want to show you how bad you are. I mean, if there's any teachers in the room, and I don't know if there are, or anyone who's been graded by teachers, which I think is all of us. A good teacher, and I'm sure I know we've all had bad teachers. A good teacher, is that their goal to make sure the student fails?
No, they want them to learn.
They want them out of their class. It's like move them on. The goal of a good teacher is that even in the correction, even in saying this is wrong, the goal would be the student would learn from it. and actually grow and access that and move forward and grow up into that. So we're going to see as we go, is that what potentially is going on here?
So literally he's trying to instruct them about how to have faith.
Exactly. You hit the nail right on the head. Is what is Yahweh's goal in all these tests? What is he wanting from his people?
Testing loyalty.
What was that?
Testing loyalty.
He's testing loyalty, but also the faith. I mean, the thing that he gets irritated at most than anything seems to be the lack of faith here.
Essentially, he's saying, "Here's to learn.
Yeah.
Take me at my word." That's what he's saying.
Exactly. And at this point, he's already done, 10 plagues, part of the Red Sea, freed you and everything. And what is his response? Is still this gracious, even though they're doubting, he's still meeting them where they're at there. So it says, there the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, saying, if you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God. Here's another moment, we read past it really quickly, but to have our ears open on this one. What's he saying? He's saying this rule moving forward that he wants of his people who are now free, that he's now bringing to himself. He's saying that hearing the voice of the Lord is key to, because he says, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ears to his commandments, and keep all his statutes. So part of this test involves hearing the Lord. If you were to say it in another way, it's something you could almost say it this way of their life depends on hearing every word that comes from the mouth of God. And I may have already given away some of where we're going here already with that. If we're going to ever hear those words again later in Scripture about your life depends on hearing the voice of the Lord. And he says, if you listen and you keep these commandments, he says, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians. Now, it's easy to again read that in a negative light, being like God being like, aren't you glad that I'm not going to hit you kind of a thing? But as an Israelite who's just seen God open a gigantic can of you-know-what on Egypt, the most powerful nation on earth, with these 10 plagues and the Red Sea and everything, what would you as an Israelite, and you know nothing about this God, you're picking it up along the way as you go, would there be any fear of what did we just sign up for? We're in the desert with this God who's leading us, and yet this God is telling, what does he say? He says, I will put none of these things on you. I will not do that to you, for I am Yahweh, the Lord. It's again that question that Pharaoh asked from the beginning of Exodus of who is Yahweh? Who is this God? And him saying, this is who Yahweh is. And then what does he say right after that? Your healer. Above anything he wants his people to understand is, I am your healer. I'm not the person who's wanting to do these things. I am your healer at the heart of it, at the core of it.
Just a question.
Yeah.
Just your perspective.
Yeah.
I have my own thoughts coming here, and I was listening to that, and that scripture just resonated for me through I couldn't listen to anything else after that. And the healer, what is your perspective? Or why do you think he said you're healer? Why didn't he say I'm your strong God? Why did he could have used any other
That's a great question. Yeah.
But he said, I am your healer.
What do you think? not just to throw it back at you, but just genuine curiosity.
Well, a couple of things.
Uh-huh.
The first thing I thought of, there's a scripture, I think in Corinthians, that says all things will pass away, and all things become new.
Yeah.
And when I was a young Christian, I meant I didn't have to work now.
Sure.
All things all gone.
Yeah.
But I still had to go through testing. I had to there was some healing that God needed to do in my life.
Yeah.
Internally, as I yielded to Him and trusted Him.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt, and it's just me, where my life is I think that gentleman I was speaking about, that their minds, the mindset was oppression all the time. So there were some real deep wounds that they were going through.
Exactly.
And yet they were seeing God doing all this stuff, and they were bent all to complain, to fuss. And this is what I got out of it. It's I got this.
Yeah.
I know there's some internal, healing that needs to be done. In the meantime, you just have to trust me.
Exactly.
And God will,
It's exactly, and you guys are all ahead of the game on this, because you guys are picking up on, I think, what the Spirit's saying through that, of what does, again, we keep asking this, just what does 400 years of slavery, of oppression do to a person? Obviously, a person doesn't live for 400 years, but that's your national identity for 400 years.
It conditions your response.
It conditions your response. What's the levels of breakage that's in every single individual in the crowd? What's that like? Does anyone of you can even relate to that, what that's like? And yet to have Yahweh say, I am your healer. I'm here to heal you. Of all things, that's what he wants them to know. It's pretty powerful. And I think it's exactly what you're saying there, of him wanting to heal them. And the way he's healing them is through, I'm testing to show what you can trust me.
Right.
It's that kind of thing.
And it's interesting that he said it right after he turned the bitter water sweet. So I wonder if there's, maybe it's too much of an extrapolation, but maybe it's even like, I'm sure they have a lot of bitterness. So I wonder if that could have been imagery to them, like he healed the water, like he could heal them maybe.
Wow, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, I think exactly. And again, we'll see here in a bit, it was like, Yahweh is not codependent, and that he is allowed to be frustrated and to have angry feelings. But what's his response in the midst of that? Is they failed the test, but he blesses them anyway. He still heals the water. Yeah.
When I look at healer, I think about life.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, our bodies were actually, I think our bodies are so amazing because they were actually made to heal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a miracle that our skin regenerates, and it's really amazing, right? And it just is kind of a testimony to how we were originally created to be living eternally, right?
Yeah.
Now, sometimes, of course, we don't, obviously that doesn't happen because of a fallen world. Death catches up with us. But what I see there is, instead of death, I am life.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Because diseases and all these things that he put on the Egyptians were to bring destruction.
Exactly.
And the opposite of that is life, which I think healing is just kind of almost synonymous with life.
Yeah.
Healing means you continue life.
Exactly. No, I think you're right on. Because again, it's that point of being like, their experience up to this point has been like, we've seen them do some pretty powerful judgments. We've seen that. But have we seen that healing aspect of him? I think you guys are right on. Yeah.
For most people back then in the pagan culture, if you got sick, you didn't have a doctor, you had a priest. And you'd go to the priest and you'd offer a sacrifice, and the priest's prayers were supposed to direct the gods in favor to you, so you wouldn't be sick. So he's telling these people, false gods do this, but that's, I'm the real thing.
Yeah.
So, mainly the reason that you worship a god was so you wouldn't get struck by lightning.
Right.
Don't do it to me. You're taking something valuable.
Exactly. Oh, it's right on. It says, then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the water. A lot of rabbis traditionally will look at this moment. It's like, so the moment was they were complaining, they were grumbling, they needed water. They stop at this bitter water, and they failed the test, but Yahweh purifies it. But from the text, it sounds like this was like right around the corner. So like it says the very next thing that happens, they come to this water. So it's that thing of like Yahweh potentially already had a solution in mind, and they broke faith. Their trust was broken in that moment, but God healed the bitter water anyway. And that's that aspect of, again, they might have failed the test, but Yahweh doesn't beat them over the head with it. He still heals the water, even that might not have been his original intent. His original intent may have been right around the corner, waiting for him. So that's just some things some rabbis over the centuries have hypothesized about and discussed. Yeah?
Okay, you said numbers mean nothing, right?
I thought I said that it meant something.
Okay, well, he says there's 70 palm trees.
Yeah.
Who went around counting and wrote it down?
Right, yeah.
Is that It's in there, but why?
Well, that was a combo I was like, oh, there's not enough time to get into, but I'll send the links for it. But just to sum it up really quickly is, where else do we see 70 later on in Scripture?
Disciples and the 70.
What was that?
12 disciples and the 70.
There's exactly the 70. And what, this might be a trick question because I don't know if we pointed out.
70 times 7?
Well, there's 70 times 7, yeah. In Genesis, there's when it lays out in Genesis 10 the nations of the world. It lists them out as 70. And then how many disciples does Jesus, aside from the 12, how many does he choose? 70. So 70 keeps popping up as the meaning of kind of the nations of the world in some ways.
So does 12.
Yeah, the 12 springs.
Yeah, exactly.
They all got one.
So there's a whole lot there. It's like, yeah, we don't have time. But I'll send the links out tomorrow for it. But basically, yeah, this sense of Yahweh calling Israel into the mission that Israel always had from Abraham. Bless the nations. Yeah. All 70 of those nations, bless them. And this is what he's bringing them into. So going on from there, they go a couple more days and they're out of food. And it says, and the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. So they're literally looking back on the plagues that they just experienced. And we're like, we were better off if we died with them, kind of a thing. When we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with anger. So again, it's that mindset has shifted a bit. The opinion of Moses and everything that God has done at this point has completely switched from that to this anger towards everything and everyone.
To angry.
Yes. You're not used when you're hungry. Those Snickers commercials are awesome. But so they're furious with the Lord. They're furious with Moses and everything. They're going back to that, what they've known at this point. It's interesting to know, what are they talking about they had so good in Egypt? Meat and bread.
Did they really?
Food, but right, exactly. But they're saying we were doing so well when we had meat and bread. What happens in this chapter?
He gives them meat and bread.
He gives them meat and bread. So it's almost like a child, in a way, throwing a tantrum on the ground and almost kind of like, if you want to go with that analogy, older, it's kind of a manipulative way, when you're saying, man, we don't ever have pizza enough around here. When you say around someone, hoping that they'll oblige you and get you the pizza or whatnot. It's almost like that, this kind of manipulative thing. And what is Yahweh's response again?
He gives it to him.
He gives it to him.
Yeah.
It's absolutely ridiculous. Yeah.
It's obvious that they have already quickly forgotten that they were the redeemed people.
Exactly.
So they're going back to previous to redeemed.
Yep.
But he named them redeemed, and they've already forgotten it.
Exactly, because what is, and you're all doing so great. I'm so happy. What is their identity? Who are they?
The hunger.
Well, they're the hungry. Yeah, they're the redeemed of Yahweh.
Yeah. They're the sons.
They're the sons. They're His people. That is their identity. Now they're failing at what that should look like or could look like. But what is Yahweh's response to that? He blesses them in the midst of that. It says, then the Lord, and this is interesting, then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day. And here again we have these words, that I may test them. This is the second test that we see Yahweh offering. So this is another note moment. And it says, whether they will walk in my law or not. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. And so he explains everything about, you're going to get, every morning you wake up, there's going to be bread on the ground for you. Every morning. Except on the Sabbath, because I'm giving you guys a day off in the week. And on that day, the day before, I'll give you double so that you can get that food. But don't go out there on the Sabbath, because I want you to rest, and there's not going to be anything anyway. And don't take any more than what you need for today. Don't take anything more. and some, it says some people do, and then they find that it's turned into worms at that point. So mistrust just breeds worms throughout the story. But again, it's a test that he's offering them. And what do you think is the teacher Yahweh's intent here? What is he trying to build in them?
A knowledge of his character.
Knowledge of his character, on who he is and what he's like. What other, like...
Trust in him.
Trust.
But to listen to him.
Exactly. So it's all those things. So it's great. So there's trust, that basic thing of trusting Yahweh and taking him at his word, hearing his word and taking him at it and believing that's what he means. It says, then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. Now, in this moment, in reading, and just if you're in the story, you're probably like, oh, shoot. He's the principal's office. He's saying, come near to the Lord. So, just reading right now, what's the feeling that elicits in hearing that?
Stuff behind your neck.
That, you're expecting some discipline here. You're expecting maybe some judgment here. You're expecting Yahweh to be angry. So we go on from there. It says, and as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. So God has showed up, and they know it's him. He's here. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. So Yahweh is not codependent. He's acknowledging, I hear it. And he's saying, say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord, I am Yahweh, your God. What is his response to the grumble? Again, he's going to bless them. And it's not even necessarily fair or necessarily right, because, again, as everyone has pointed out, they've been given quite a bit of evidence at this point that Yahweh is who he says he is, and that he's the one who freed them, who redeemed them, who made them a new people. And yet they're grumbling against him. So I think some anger may be owed in this moment. And yet Yahweh's response is, I want them to draw near to me in the midst of that. I want them to draw near, and I'm going to bless them regardless of that. And for the point being that you shall again know, not intellectually know, because the word always means intimate knowledge. I want you to experience Yahweh, your God. Who is Yahweh? What is he like? He's gracious. And we might hear this later in Exodus, he's slow to anger. And he's abounding in steadfast love. So we're seeing that again, that test of what he's wanting his people to know about him. I want you to know who I am. As someone here said, I think it was you, talking about that they would know Yahweh, that they would know his character and what he's like. So they go out in the morning, they find manna, they find the seed, and it says it tastes good, which is it didn't have to taste good. And Yahweh makes it taste good, He gives them bread every morning. They go out to gather, he gives them instructions on that. In the evening they get quail. They get what they wanted. They get what they asked for. And then he goes even further than that. And what's the next thing he does? He prescribes a Sabbath. We talked about this a little bit last week of you have been a slave for 400 years, your people. What does a normal day for a slave look like? We talked about this, but repeat it again. What does a normal day look like?
Work all day.
Work all day.
Every day.
Every single day. Does the empire, the controlling powers, care if you're tired? No. Does the powers that be care that you need a vacation? No. I mean, do they, if you're struggling in the middle of your work, do the taskmasters stop the progress of the building to care for you? No. I mean, what are they going to do?
Beat you.
They're going to beat you. They're going to beat you until you keep moving. And when you can't keep moving, what are they going to do?
Replace you.
Kill you or let you die right there on the ground. I mean, and replace you. Because what is your worth to the empire? What's your worth as a human being?
Only your work.
Your work, exactly, only your work. And so your value as a human being completely 100%, if you're a slave, 100% depends on how much you can churn out in a day. That is exactly what your worth depends upon. Because you're not going to live another day. I mean, it's a miserable existence, but at least you get to live, you know. But that's no way to live. But that's exactly that's your identity. And what does it mean for Yahweh to say, for one day out of the week, you do nothing? And this is how serious I am about it. I am making it a punishable offense if you do any work on that day. I mean, Yahweh is quite literally giving them a break and being like, I, by the force of law, am enforcing you take a day off. I mean, what does that say to you as a being when, and maybe invite us even today, what are the things when we do have our days off and we have to be doing something? What's the struggle there that's happening in us? Yeah.
That sounds like he doesn't want us to burn out.
What was that?
He doesn't want us to burn out.
He doesn't want us to burn out, exactly. And when we struggle with resisting the Sabbath, you know, what is that in us that's, you know, fighting that?
Rebellion.
There's rebellion. Yeah, very simple. Yeah, rebellion. What else? Like, what's the thing we're believing in ourselves?
Our value is in our work.
Our value is in the work. So there's usually an identity crisis going on in some way in us when we're like, I have to do this. Because why? Because my value as a human being exists and depends upon what I can churn out and what I can do. So when Yahweh says to people, your little goal for the day every Sabbath is nothing, what does that say to you as a person about what your worth is to God?
Values you as a person.
He just values, for the sake of being a human being, of just being one of his creation, that is more than enough worth and value, and you don't have to do anything to earn that. You have to do anything. And that's what he invites his people into, is one day a week. Can you just rest in the fact that everything's going to be okay, that I'm God, you're my creation, and enjoy it? Can you just enjoy a day once a week? Marty Solomon talks about this when, you know, in observing the Sabbath, and don't hear what I'm not saying about being like, we gotta, like, we're making the same mistake the Pharisees made and be like, you have to observe the Sabbath, you know, kind of a deal, and not do anything. But there's definitely wisdom in God being quite literally like, take a day off, like once a week. But he talks about whenever you talk about Sabbath and somebody asks him, how do you observe the Sabbath? Then he's like, you're already doing it wrong if you're asking the question, how? And in his house, but I'm like, let us mere mortals who struggle with observing the Sabbath, what does that mean? He says they have 3 words that him and his family observe every Sabbath, which is no work, just play, God loves us. And that's their motto throughout the day. Whatever work that is not pleasant or something that you don't necessarily want to do, you don't do that for one day a week. You just do whatever is pleasing in that moment and you enjoy the day and rest in the fact Yahweh loves us. And that is enough, more than enough reason to exist. And this is what he gifts to his people. It's again, he's gifting rest to them. Because again, as we already went over, their background for 400 years has been nothing but toil, murder, and oppression. And he's inviting them just to rest. Take a day off. And I love this picture because it's just a child being a child, resting out in the middle of a field. And Yahweh's inviting them again to be the children of Yahweh. If you're going to be my son, Israel, because he says Israel is my son. If you're going to be my son rests. And that's what I want of you. I want you to enter into rest. And does Hebrews have anything to do with entering into the rest of Yahweh? And so this moment is so important that God even prescribes for them to take an omer of manna and put it in the Ark of the Covenant when the Ark of the Covenant is built. I mean, in the Ark of the Covenant, we are told later that it's the 10 Commandments, it's Aaron's staff that budded, and it's just this other artifact, this little bit of manna that he says put in the Ark as a perpetual memory for forever. As long as this exists, what does he want remembered by his people?
I took care of you.
I took care of you, exactly. and we see that throughout the prophets. Again, our modern construct is to just look back at the story and be like, oh, this is about, idol worship versus loyalty to Yahweh. But what is the language Yahweh uses throughout the prophets? That's a trick question because I didn't prescribe any of those readings. But again and again and again, he talks about, I was a father to you. I carried you through the wilderness. I fed you. I clothed you. I kept you the whole way. It's this link from Yahweh's perspective. It's like this was marriage. This was a relationship between a husband and a wife. This was a husband between a father and his children that was going on this whole time. And what does he want them to remember? I took care of you the whole way. And it says this will carry on until they get to the promised land. And even, if you get to Numbers, you'll know that this journey wasn't meant to take 40 years. It wasn't plan A on the thing. And yet 40 years of what wasn't the original plan, he supplies every morning and every evening for them what they need for food. But even that, some still don't meet the test, and some, it says, still go out on the Sabbath day looking for food, and there's no food to be found, and Yahweh's a bit frustrated, again, that they're resisting that. And I could not find a graphic, because we talked about this last week, about the God of enough that Jewish people talk about in reference to this, and this is the closest thing, is God enough? And that's how we reference it, is, the question, is God enough? But they often talk about the God of enough. He doesn't give them more. Like some of us would be like, I'll give you a week's supply of food and you bring that in kind of deal. But he's like, I'll literally supply it every day, just what you need for today. And it even points out, I didn't have it in the slide here, but it points out that those who drew more than what was needed, at the end of the day, it was gone. And those who drew less, it was filled. That often we are wanting, we're wanting more and more. But what if Yahweh is inviting his creation in this story? He's inviting everyone. I want to be the enough. Like every day, you don't need the more that's not even necessary, not even needed. And I won't give you less of what you can handle, but I'll give you exactly what you need for today. And is there something in that for all of us in wrestling with being like, can he just be the God of enough, where your needs are met today, and that's okay? So again, the story here is, and several of you have said this already, which is so good, their background up to this point is an abused people. They've been misused and abused for 400 years. I kind of look at these sections of scripture as almost like the account of an abused child. Has anyone ever had to either adopt or foster an abused child before? Someone who has been taken advantage of and oppressed by their family. And it's no judgment on the child whatsoever, but everyone will tell you it's very difficult. It's very tough. Because exactly as you said, there have been defense mechanisms from day one that have been built in. Why? For survival. You were beaten every day, like the basic need for survival builds up these lies that you're telling yourself that you have to hold to. You have to hold to. You're being dumb if you don't. Yeah, you had a question?
Well, I go to prison, and one of the hardest things for these women is trust.
Yeah.
Because the people who they were supposed to have been taking care of them were the ones who broke their trust.
Exactly.
So God is trying to build trust in his people.
Exactly. And that's what we're seeing, I think, here in these chapters, is you're seeing the parental love of Yahweh, quite literally loving the abuse out of his people. Being like, I know this is wrong, you're failing the test, I'm still going to bless you. I'm not going to do what an oppressor would do, is if you don't meet my standard, withhold food from you. Because I'm not like that. I'm Yahweh. I'm the Lord. That's not how I do things. I don't withhold even when you fail. I bless you even when you're in the wrong here. It's a completely different economy Yahweh is trying to work within his people. And so that's what I think we're getting at moving forward. It says, all the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim. We'll see it here in just a couple of verses, but just make a note. They camped at Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" This is the third time test is mentioned in these passages. And it's not even Yahweh necessarily testing them. Now they're testing Yahweh. Are we going to hear that ever again of somebody testing the Lord and what that means? And we're going to get to that. So they're testing Yahweh. And what is Yahweh's response going to be? This is the third go around. What's he going to do? And the Lord said to Moses, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb." And this painting, I could not find it where it did not cut off God's head at the top there. You see, you're supposed to be the personification of God on top of the rock. So God is literally saying, I, Yahweh myself, will stand before you there on the rock. And we, tend to take that as just, that's not literal. But Jewish rabbis, again, would look at this passage and be like, we feel like it's that strange second person that's Yahweh, but distinct from him. And he's saying, I'm going to stand on the rock before you. And what does he say to do? And you shall strike the rock. And the Hebrew for strike, whenever that's used, is always a killer stroke. So Yahweh is telling him, hit that rock as hard as you can, as if you're going to kill something. Where is Moses hitting in the direction of when he does that?
Towards God.
Towards Yahweh. Because Yahweh's on the rock, and he's hitting that thing right at him in the direction towards him. And what's the fruit of striking towards the direction of Yahweh? And water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. What's the product of a human being striking at the direction of Yahweh? Life-giving water flowing forth. And that this story, again, is not about them doing something to earn Yahweh's approval or Yahweh's blessing. They're failing the whole way here. And Yahweh is saying, when you strike in this direction, nothing but life-giving water is coming out. Do we ever see that again, where there's a strike towards Yahweh and rivers of living water flow forth? We're going to see that at the pivotal moment of God, Yahweh, revealing his heart, is when a strike comes in his direction, life-giving water comes out for the people who's doing the striking.
Didn't Jesus also declare that in the temple?
Exactly, yeah. He says, I am the river of life, the living water. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that was just, there's so much there.
That festival was about, I don't know, I think I remember that festival was about water or something.
So Ezekiel prophesies saying from the certain part of the temple that I'm forgetting at the moment, it says from a certain part of the temple, one day rivers of living water will flow forth. John's gospel says Jesus is standing in that exact same spot when he says the words, I am the water of life. Yeah. And anyone who takes me in will have rivers of water coming from them. So there's exactly that language going on. That's a huge theme throughout Scripture, is water of living, of life.
1 Corinthians 10:4 it says, talking to the Israelites, and I'll drink the same spiritual drink, for they drink of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Exactly.
And rabbis, again, didn't have time to get into it, but rabbis would look at that and quite literally believe the rock followed them around wherever they went. That's what they took from it. And so Paul's looking at that and being like, that's Christ. There's only one other person for that. And so it says, and he called the name of the place Massa and Meribah because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord among us or not? Now, you're asking the question, is God among us? Today, modern day, we're always, it's kind of our charismatic bent to always be asking, is God amongst us? Kind of a deal. But they had a lot of proof that God was among them. They had a lot. And they're asking the question, is he here or is he not? even after in the midst of this third trial. When we look at this event recorded elsewhere in Scripture throughout the Psalms, particularly in Psalm 78, it says, "Yet they sinned still more against him, rebelling against the Most High." So there's that rebellion you mentioned. Against the Most High in the desert, they tested God in their heart. So this is the moment that they're testing him by demanding the food they craved. They spoke against God, saying, Can God spread a table in the wilderness? He struck the rocks so that water gushed out and streams overflowed. Can he also give bread or provide meat for his people? Does that sentence, if we can construe it just a little differently, is it going to sound familiar? The question is, they're basically demanding of Yahweh, if you are who you say you are, give us bread in the desert. If you're Yahweh, prove it who you are. And you guys, I think, are picking up on that. Therefore, when the Lord heard, he was full, again, here's God expressing his anger. He was full of wrath. A fire was kindled against Jacob. His anger rose against Israel because they did not believe in God and did not trust his saving power. And what does God's wrath look like in this moment? Yet, and that key word yet, he commanded the skies above and opened the doors of heaven, and he rained down on them manna to eat and gave them the grain of heaven. Man ate of the bread of the angels. He sent them food in abundance. He caused the east wind to blow in the heavens, and by his power he let out the south wind. He rained meat on them like dust, winged birds like the sand of the seas. He let them fall in the midst of their camp, all around their dwellings, and they ate and were well fed, for he gave them, or well filled, for he gave them what they craved. So God in his anger is blessing his people despite it. Again, no matter how much his people are failing here, he's just blessing them in the midst of that.
It reminds me can I?
Yeah, go for it.
It just reminds me of James 4:3. You ask and do not receive because you ask amiss, that you may spend it on your own pleasure. Just, kind of the theme of, how many times I've asked for something I shouldn't get, and I was just continually, having a fit.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I get it, and then I go, whoops.
Right. Yeah. Because, again, the character of this God, Yahweh, he does not respond to people necessarily how they deserve. It's just not his character. That's just not what he's like. He just doesn't do that way. And he doesn't withhold even when the person's in the wrong. Sounds like another word would be parent. Yeah. Potentially father. Just a good parent. Yeah.
I'm still going back to the fact that their disposition is already one of oppression and a certain way of thinking for a long time.
Yeah.
This is a perfect example of all in process.
Yes.
And we don't lose stuff from the past very easily.
Exactly.
And even verse 17, the whole Israelite community left the desert of sin. Now, I saw it up there on the screen, but I didn't say anything. But they're still, and they travel from place to place, and I would say, trying to get rid of their sin.
Oh, sure.
Couldn't quite get it out of their system. And they keep running against this. They keep going up against the same lessons over and over again.
Yeah.
Like we do.
Yeah.
If you don't learn something, he's probably going to bring you back around on it again because he needs for you to learn something.
Exactly. And what's the point of bringing them back to that again? Exactly what you just said. He wants them to trust him.
Yeah.
Because there's no better place to be than in trusting Yahweh. For everything, he wants them to trust him. He's like, I love you enough that I'm going to make you repeat this thing again and again so that you can enjoy being Yahweh's people. Because that's what it's like to trust, like every single day he'll take care of me. Every single day he'll give me exactly what I need. And that's what he wants for his creation, that everyone would know that, to feel that. So, it's moving on there. Just to recap the story, now to pull this in a bit of what's happening here. So just follow along with me here. We have a people who go through the water. And rabbis have always looked at that moment as the Spirit interacting, because there's the breath of God moving across the water, splitting it in two. There's a people going through the water, and a spirit, something with the Spirit of God happens there. They then go into the desert on their way to Mount Sinai. Now, there's debate over this. This is not foolproof, but you don't even need this next detail to make this connection. But Jewish tradition for years has always been that it took 40 days from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai. So you have people going through the water, the Spirit happening, going through the desert for 40 days. How many tests do they have till they get to Sinai? If you count them here, here's 1, here's 2, there's 3. There's 3 tests on a 40-day journey in the wilderness. And this third test, you'll even notice, isn't necessarily Yahweh, but it's saying, now you're testing Yahweh. Now you're demanding something. You're trying to ask Yahweh to prove something. Prove it to me. Even though you've already done it enough, prove it again. And one of these tests, the first one, has something to do with the word of the Lord. That their life depends on hearing the word of the Lord. And the other one of the tests also has bread in the desert. Yahweh giving bread. Yeah. Yahweh has the power to give bread in the middle of the wilderness. And then again, that third test being them testing him. And then they arrive at Mount Sinai. That's what happens next. They finally get there. Do we know anyone else? Anyone else? Jesus. Who will go through the water? The Spirit will descend on him. An event with the Spirit happens. He goes in the desert for 40 days. There's 3 tests he endures in those 40 days. One, the first test has to do with bread. If you are the Son of God, if you are Yahweh, provide some bread here. Make the bread thing happen. Do what Yahweh did for his children in the first time. Do that now. And Jesus' response is, you don't live by bread alone. You live by every word that comes from the mouth of God. That was the test in the first one. You live by every word. So the Son is living out what the children of Yahweh originally were supposed to do. He's living that out. That third test being Yahweh, or not Yahweh, Satan saying, jump, prove your Yahweh. Prove it. And Jesus being like, you will not test him. Do not put God to the test. And that was the third test in the desert where they put Yahweh to the test. So again, it's that understanding of when Jesus said, I have come to fulfill the law and the prophets. He's not just talking about, I came to beat all the levels that you can't beat, which is true. That's definitely part of it. He's also saying, I lived your story. I lived your story, and I lived it to its fulfillment, to the fullness of what it should have been and could have been. You guys failed those 3 tests, and I've done it for you. I've endured the exact same thing. I've gone through it, and I've identified with it, and I've overcome that. And then, after those tests in Matthew's gospel, Matthew is all about showing Jesus being the new Moses, the fulfillment of every Jewish expectation. What happens in Matthew's gospel? Jesus goes to a mount and gives a new law. Where the old law had been given at Sinai after the testing. But he goes and he gives a new one, a new commandment that he starts to go through. So we're seeing that what is happening here? What is God saying in the long run? So what we've seen so far at this point of the story is the first 15 chapters is Yahweh pulling his people out of Egypt and getting them out of there. But then he spends the rest of the book, basically the rest of the Old Testament, getting Egypt out of his people. Adam Cox talks about this quite a bit, that it was pretty simple actually for Yahweh to get them out. It wasn't a lot of a struggle for him to get them out of there. To work salvation, Yahweh did it like that. But the process after that of getting Egypt, that way of thinking that they've been raised with their whole generations, to get that out of them will take the rest of the book and the rest of the Old Testament. And another word that Paul would like to use is sanctification. Do we see our story at all happening with that story of, I have been saved from oppression. I have quite literally been redeemed, past tense. Not, I'm redeemed until I mess up again and I have to get in Yahweh's good graces. No, I'm redeemed no matter what because of what he did. but he's working Egypt out of me and testing me to practice trust and relationship with him. And leading, because why? Because he wants me to be his child, wants me to be his son, his daughter. So much there, but not enough time. So then, just to wrap this up, we finished. It says, then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. These are the Amalekites come out and battle with them. It's important to point out that they're at Rephidim. That I made that note earlier. Rephidim, when listed elsewhere in Scripture, is always talking about the giant territories that Israel was sent on mission to remove, to destroy. Rephidim is always included on that list. So the Amalekites, what they're working with is not just normal people. They're quite literally warring with the people who are descendants of the Nephilim. And there's in that story throughout Genesis. Also, it's known that Amalekites, we don't know, a huge amount about the history, but what we do know, everybody's like, I wouldn't want to necessarily be their neighbor, kind of a thing. They were a tribe quite literally built on the premise of war. That was their complete existence. It'd almost be equivalent like the Spartans. They were seeing like 300 or something, a culture that was based purely around military. Amalekites quite literally lived off of their conquering and going around to different tribes and wiping out and taking spoil. That was their culture. That's what they did. Their favorite tactic would be to come up from behind any tribe, because in any movement back then, it would be the lame, the sick, the women and children always stay in the back, because they're the slowest. They're the ones that always can take a stop. So when they stop, we have to stop, kind of deal. Amalekites would always strike there first. That was their number 101 military tactic. You find where the women, the children, the sick, the lame are, you strike there, you plunder them, kind of a deal. So you're seeing, if it says they came and met Israel, most likely that's what's happening right here. So they go out, they battle with Israel, and so we're told that God tells Moses, put your rod up there, hold it up. And while he held it up, they were winning, and while he dropped it, they were losing. But Aaron and Hur hold it up for him. And then they're victorious, they defeat them. It says, and Moses built an altar and called the name of it, the Lord is my banner. And in Egypt, you see these banners here at the front. That was always a sign for anyone else out there. If you see those banners, if you can get to those banners, there's your safety, because you're within the shelter of the empire. If you can get to those banners, you're safe. And here Moses is saying, the Lord, Yahweh, is my banner. I don't need to go anywhere else. Yahweh is my banner. Saying, a hand upon the throne of the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation, which again speaks to Yahweh's thing of like, there's some things I tolerate, but one thing I won't tolerate is attacking the weak from behind. I'm not going to ever tolerate that. And he makes his example here of that. So just to wrap this up, I know we're just going a minute over. It says, Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel's people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her home, because Moses went to Egypt with her, but then she's already back here. So we're told that he actually sent her home at some point. Also says, along with her 2 sons. Exodus tells us when they went into Egypt, they only had 1. They come back, she has 2. Many thinking that she was pregnant at the time, and Moses sent her back at one point to get out of Dodge before everything happens. The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. And the name of the other, Eliezer, for he said, the God of my father was my help. That identity in Moses is building again with his people. And he delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. So he then tells Jethro everything that's happened. And says, Jethro said, blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. Here we have a Midianite, someone who doesn't know the God of Israel, who's seeing his actions, and he's coming into a relationship with him. You see this missional thing that God, Yahweh, is wanting the nations. What has he said? He wants the nations to know who he is and what he's like, to come into relationship with him. He then observes Moses is like getting it from everyone, each side every day, listening to all these people, and then makes the suggestion, you need to raise up elders to disperse this amount around. Because again, this is not about one person having relationship or authority with Yahweh. Yahweh wants it shared amongst everyone. It's not just about Moses here. And so that takes us to where we're going to pick up next week. Is now the next step is Mount Sinai, the big moment of what all that means, what's going to go down over there. So what do we do now with just what we discussed tonight? Understand our story. I think that's the big thing about understanding our story. And if our story has been grafted in, our story is a story of salvation and new identity. Not being the old, you are something new, a new creation. And there's a promised land up ahead, but there's a wilderness in between, and that's where we find ourselves. So knowing that helps frame us in life. And accepting the test and not seeing it as Yahweh trying to prove something wrong about you, but to grow us and hopefully pass the test, wanting us to pass the test and move forward. And how do we do that? Through trust, rest, and obedience. We just trust him and we rest in him that everything's taken care of, and we just listen and obey. But if we don't, which is likely for every single one of us, plenty of experience with that, you receive his grace and allow grace to be the mechanism for change, allowing that to be, I'm still the redeemed, I'm still his son, I'm still his daughter. That hasn't changed, and he's wanting me to grow from this. He doesn't test me so I can fail and flunk out. He wants me to grow in this, and he's willing to stick through the whole process. So, I throw this up because next week we will be going through, this is the part in Scripture where, you have your New Year's resolution. I'm going to get through the Bible in a year. I'm going to do it. You get to Exodus, and this is the chapters that you get, and this is where it stalls. This is where it just, it goes down. This is the law portion of Scripture of Exodus. And I just want to give this one disclaimer. I really encourage, because next week would be the week I think anybody would be interested in, I might just not go. This is talking about laws and everything, because we're going to go over Exodus 19 through 31. This is going to be a big chunk. I want to relegate all this legal stuff to one night so that we don't have to dwell on it too much. But the importance of discussing it is, and I promise it's not going to be boring, it's so much more than how we've read it and made of it. Yeah. But the reason of going through it, and I'd encourage everyone to be there for that, is these are the conversations going on in the world about what God's law is about. And about how silly and how not thought out this is, kind of deal. So we want to examine again, what did God mean with his law when he said it? And what was the implications for his people where they actually thought this was good news? They actually thought this was a good deal. So I just want to put that out there to encourage so that we can actually, when the dialogue does come up from someone who doesn't know the Scripture, we can actually engage with that and actually have an answer for that. So, any questions, thoughts, or anything about that? Cool.
Good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys for participating. So, see you next week.